Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Allie Stiefel. I'm the director of the Regeneron Science Talent Search. I'm here with my colleague, Elaine Edwards, who's the specialist for the Regeneron Science Talent Search. And we're so excited that you're here and that maybe you're here because you've opened an STS application to share your research with us this year. We can't wait to see what you've done. This is the third in our webinar series that we've been holding this summer and fall. So if you have not checked out our first two webinars, the first was about an overview of the Science Talent Search. So if you're looking for more about what is the program, how do you apply, that's the webinar for you. So definitely check that out. If you're a supportive adult, like an educator or a mentor, even a parent or guardian who is supporting a student through the research process or our application process, I definitely recommend that you check out webinar 2, which is all about ways you can support students. But tonight, we're actually going to answer your questions from entrants. We sent out a survey, you may or may not have seen it, where you could submit any question that you have for us about the application process. And we've received a ton of great questions. Elaine and I are going to answer them all tonight. But if you have more as we're going through, you think of more, please leave them in the chat. We'll be sure to answer as many as we can before we're done tonight. And if you have any questions at all after the webinar, you can always email our team at sts@societyforscience.org. But before we answer your questions, I'm actually going to turn it over to Elaine, who's going to show you a few resources that you may or may not have seen yet on our website that will help you with the application as well. Take it away, Elaine.
All right, thank you, Allie. So everyone, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. And so what we're showing you now is the STS application homepage. And we just want to point out a couple of extremely important resources. This is just in case we don't answer your question tonight. These are some other places that you can get assistance. So right here on this homepage, which itself contains an overview of the program and is where you'll go to log into the application, you'll see that we have some other helpful pages up here in the top left. We have an STS frequently asked questions page, some recommender tips, and a resources page. This FAQ is constantly being updated with new information, kind of based on the kinds of questions that we're receiving via email and any changes that we're making to the system. So definitely make sure to check this one out if you're unsure of anything, and to check it out regularly. It has info on eligibility, application troubleshooting, research project and recommendation questions, and so much more. And then speaking of recommendations, we also have these recommender tips. This is also basically an FAQ page, but it's exclusive to the kinds of things that adult recommenders might encounter on their side of the system. So that's a great resource to point your recommenders to if they're encountering any tech trouble or have any questions about the recommendation. Finally, this resources page is one you'll also want to visit. This is where we've compiled every helpful item that we can think of. And we keep this one updated too. So tomorrow you'll see that we'll even have added this webinar recording. Something we especially want to point out on this page are application tour videos. This walks you through the application step by step and contains helpful tips for each section. So definitely recommend if you're having trouble with a specific task, you can come here and select that task or watch the entire application tour video in one. Your best resource, as always, though, is going to be that rules book, which is also linked here on your resource page. And there it is. This also changes every year, and so it contains the most up-to-date information on all things STS rules and guidelines. So please do take the time to read through it. As part of the application, we do ask that you attest that you have done so. But important to note that if your question isn't answered in any of these places, or you have a rules question or another question related to your very specific and unusual situation, the final resource we recommend that Allie has mentioned is definitely reaching out to us at our help email. Again, that's sts@societyforscience.org. If you reach out with a question, we'll be able to get back to you within 24 hours. So those are all the places that you can access if, again, after this webinar, you still have questions. But for now, I think Allie and I are going to go ahead and get into some submissions. So I'm going to start off with a couple eligibility questions we received. Our first question is from someone wondering, I'm 26 years old, I'm Chinese. Do I still have eligibility to apply to the Regeneron STS? And I'm actually going to lump this in with another question that's asking, I'm in grade 11 for the 2021 to 2022 school year. Am I still eligible to apply? The answer to both of these is, first of all, definitely read through our eligibility guidelines, which are on page 6 of that rules and entry instructions book. Sort of summarize, the important thing to note is that Regeneron STS as a competition is open to high school seniors, so students in their last year of secondary school in the United States, or US citizens who are in school abroad. So if you abide by those eligibility guidelines and the others listed in that document, you're good to go. If not, unfortunately, this is not the competition for you.
Thanks, Elaine. We're gonna shift into some questions that we've received about essays. If you've opened your application, you know that essays are one of the tasks of our application, where we ask you to answer some questions both about your project, but also about you that are unrelated to your project. So we often receive questions about those. The first question I'll answer is, how important are our answers to the essay questions, especially those unrelated to our project? For Science Talent Search, they're very important, actually. You might be thinking, this is a science competition. Why do you need to know about me as an individual? Well, that's kind of the point with the Science Talent Search. This is different than other science competitions in that we're looking for scientific leaders of the future. And to do that, we examine a variety of criteria, including leadership skills and evidence of how you're impacting your community, things like that. And so we have a holistic review process, and we are looking to see and learn a little bit more about you and the things that you care about. So consider them to be very important. The good news is this year we've aligned some of those essay prompts with the Common App. So hopefully you're finding, let us know if this isn't true, but hopefully you're finding that you can reuse some of those essays for other programs and college applications, and reuse those on us as well. I have a related question I'll go ahead and answer here as well, Elaine. Do you have suggestions for what not to write on personal essays? Like, are there any cliches, that kind of thing? This is a great question, and I think the point of these essays is for us to learn more about you. And one thing I would avoid is lying, right? Like, this is not the time to get creative, and creative writing is great, but it's not really what we're looking for in the STS application. Not telling the truth, anything that would get you in trouble with your best friend, that's what you shouldn't be writing about here in terms of content. But in terms of avoiding cliches, I mean, probably the same advice you've heard for any other essay that you're writing at this point in your life would apply here. But the point being, we want to learn more about you and what you care about. And Elaine, I'll let you answer the next one.
Excellent. So I actually have some other essay questions too. One of them here is asking, is it all right to respond with a bullet list instead of an essay for some questions? The answer is, yeah, that is completely totally fine. Basically, again, like Ali said, we want context. We want information about who you are as a person. If you think the best way to relay that is a bulleted list rather than an essay, we definitely encourage you to go for it. And sort of similarly, I have another one about essays. Should the fun fact question be serious or silly? And again, we're going to sound like a broken record, but it really depends on you. If you think that your fun fact, the most interesting one, the one that is the most you, is serious, if it's silly, again, it doesn't matter as long as that is being true to who you are and is being honest in the application. That's really what our judges want to see.
Great. Our next question is about test scores, which you may or may not know are optional for the Science Talent Search. We've been test optional for about 10 years. We also allow self-reporting. We also allow super scoring. So student is wondering, do you recommend that students enter test scores, and at what grade would students benefit from reporting their grades? So these are actually two different questions. So do I recommend it? If you have them and you're proud of them, great. It's not something that anyone is penalized for not submitting. They can be useful. So one of the things that, of course, we assess is academic aptitude. And for some students, just like in college admissions, a test score might be helpful in the case that you're trying to show that you're passionate and very strong in the sciences, but maybe you had a lower grade in a science class, and maybe there was an extenuating circumstance. and then your good test scores can help compensate for that, right? But if you don't have them because you don't want to share them, that's totally fine. I think less than half of entrants usually do. And that carries over into like the scholar level and the finalist level. It doesn't seem to impact the numbers and how they carry into those levels of awards. In terms of grades are required. So transcripts are required for our application. This is something that you do through your recommendation. So you are required to request a recommendation called a high school report from your high school guidance counselor, and your counselor will upload your transcript for us. We do not require like current semester grades. So if you're a high school senior now, right, and you are applying for the Science Talent Search and our application is due in November, we don't need to see your first quarter grades. Really, we're just looking at your grades from your freshman, sophomore, and junior year. So because of that, don't delay. Definitely ask your counselors now if you haven't already for that recommendation. They are inundated with requests this time of year, as I'm sure you know. So the more time you can give them by asking now, I'm sure they would really appreciate. So that's my answer to that question.
And I actually have a question also sort of related to transcripts. So if my high school science research program is part of a joint university program, can I upload my university transcript under task 9? The answer to this is yes, that is totally fine. So your high school counselor, in the recommendation that you request from them, they're going to need to upload your high school transcript. But if you have outside grades from another program, that is absolutely where you can go ahead and make sure that you have those submitted in the application as well.
Yeah, and then also for further clarification on that, your current high school transcript must come from your guidance counselor, though. The only exception is what Elaine has just described, which is the former school or programs like that. Great. I think we have another question about activities above. Elaine, do you want to tackle that one?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, so this person asks, in the activities list in task 8, do we include the project we're submitting to Regeneron STS, even though we're already providing all the details about it in the rest of the application? This is actually really up to you. If, for instance, you think that you're going to be able to provide additional context by talking about it as one of your activities, there's an opportunity there to talk about something that you haven't yet gotten to talk about. That's absolutely a great place to do so, but you do not have to. This is also an opportunity for you to talk about other things and other activities that make you you.
Great, thanks, Elaine. Our next couple of questions are about recommendations, and specifically it seems like who to request to write your recommendation. So I'll cover that kind of loosely. There are 3 types of recommendations that a student or an entrant, as you probably know, has to request for the Science Talent Search. One is that high school report we already talked about, so that's a transcript. The second is an educator recommendation. So that should come from a teacher, maybe a science teacher, ideally. You can request 2 of those. So one should come from your science teacher. The other can come from another teacher, another science teacher, or from a supportive adult who knows you in another context. I wouldn't make this person your first ask. One definitely should be a science teacher, someone who knows you in a classroom, or a STEM teacher of any sort. But the other can be like your boss at your after school job, or your soccer coach, or whatever, someone who knows you and can speak to your integrity or your leadership. That's something that we've allowed for a few years and is pretty common. The third type of recommendation is your project recommendation. So this should come from the scientist or mentor who knows your project best. Some students are not mentored very closely enough where they think that they have a mentor to write this. In that case, we recommend that you ask a parent or teacher who knows your project best. But if you were mentored, it should be the person or up to 2 people who know your work the best. So that plays into this first question that we have about a student who's for a very particular reason, their mentor is no longer able to write their recommendation, some sad circumstances. So who's the next best person? Is it the head of the lab? Is it who would it be? And in this case, I would recommend another member of the lab who can speak to your work, who knows that person's opinion of you. This is a rare circumstance, but I think it also applies in the case where sometimes entrants like to ask like the fanciest person they know, right? Like the most prestigious scientist who doesn't really know you, to write a recommendation for you instead of the grad student who sat next to you and knows every step of what you did. That grad student is going to write a better and stronger recommendation for you 9 times out of 10. So that's my recommendation there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of recommendations too, and wondering who to ask, we have someone wondering, one of my collaborators is from Germany and not a US citizen. Can they write the recommendation letter for me? The answer is yes, absolutely. We see this a lot. Again, science is very collaborative, and we don't have any limits on like who you're collaborating with, as long as it's abiding by our guidelines. And so definitely, as Ali was saying, if that person is the best person to complete your recommendation and knows the most about your research, that's the person you want to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so the next few questions we're going to address are about student research, and I think particularly some of the rules that we have around student research. Some of them are somewhat specific about types of research. They may not apply to everyone watching, but I strongly encourage, as Elaine did earlier, that all entrants read the rules book. You'll also all be required to fill out task 3 of the application, which operates a bit like a rules wizard and will tell you what paperwork you'll need for certain types of projects, because certain types of projects do require pre-approval. So going on from that, the first question that we received in this topic: are studies involving animal tissues looked down upon? Will it hurt our submission and chances of winning? No, not at all. We see tons of projects that deal with animal and human tissues. They will require, in most cases, some types of paperwork to identify where did you receive the tissues from. Was it from a publicly available data source? Great. Our database or commercial catalog? Great. Provide documentation about where it came from. Is it something your mentor gave to you? Materials that your mentor gave to you? Great. In the case of animals, they give you tissue as long as the animal wasn't sacrificed for your project, and we're talking vertebrate animals here, then you're okay. But again, you're going to need to show some paperwork, probably from your mentor's original study in that case, or a source if their research is published. So our wizard will help you with this. But all to say, no, we love that kind of research. We see it all the time. We also are seeing more and more projects that are data based purely on data that they've received. So like a student is receiving data about animal or human movements or tissues that then they analyze, and they need to adhere to these same rules as well. So keep that in mind. But yeah, by all means, go ahead, as long as it's in the rules. The next one, student says, if I was not aware of the IRB approval form before considering entering my research into the Science Talent Search, is it still okay to submit my research? This is a tough one because certain types of projects do require pre-approval from an institutional review board, as an IRB. That's what that means, before the research or the data is collected or the research takes place. So one, the student should check to see if their type of research needs any pre-approvals before embarking on a project, is my recommendation. Ask your science teacher. If you participate in your local or regional science fair, they all have what's called a scientific review committee that can help you assess what you might need for certain types of research and what's allowed. But if you do submit a project that needed IRB approval, and that's when you work with humans, in most or a lot of cases, then you enter the research anyways without it, there's a good chance that it'll probably get disqualified. Now, there are some types of projects you can do with humans that don't require an IRB, or with human generated data or observational studies, but check out our rules book because there are some nuances there as well. Elaine, you want to get the next one?
Sure. So this person asks, if I have only worked on my research for 1 year, will I be at a disadvantage from others who have worked on a project for multiple years? The answer to that is no, absolutely not. Your research can be conducted over any length of time, and that includes a long amount of time or a very short one. We've definitely seen winning projects come through that have only had their data collection done over the past 3 weeks. And we have some done over a much longer period of time. So again, the answer to that is no.
Great. Here's another one asking about, oh, I lost it. Well, I think if you have more questions about rules, we're happy to answer them. Like I said before, you can email us at sts@societyforscience.org. But there are a lot of nuances in the rules, so it's always good to check. And if you're someone watching this because you might want to enter STS in a future year, but you're not eligible yet this year, or you're an adult supporting students, we always recommend feel free to open a test application. Just please identify yourself in the first task as not a true applicant for this year. But you can go through task 3 and see what kind of paperwork it might require for the type of research that you're thinking. So we recommend that. Okay, so we'll move into some questions we've received about research reports and how to present your research in the application. We've received a lot of questions about this. Can you suggest a format for the research report? How should we introduce the topic, our mentors, the institution where we completed the research? Where does it belong? It's a good question. So one, recommend you check out the rules book again. We have a 1-pager within the rules book that has all of the guidelines that we require for your research paper. It can only be up to 20 pages. That does not include your cover page, or your title page, your abstract, or your bibliography. It includes everything else. We do have some font and spacing requirements as well. In terms of where do you introduce like your mentors in the institution, you don't have, for us, you don't have to use valuable space in the paper itself for that. There are plenty of opportunities in task 4 of the application where you can do that. Make sure you do that. We'll ask you to identify your mentor, how you met them, how long you worked together, that sort of thing. And same with like, how did you get the idea for your research? If you need more background than our questions allow, which happens quite a bit, you will need to dedicate some of your paper to that. But in terms of other formatting issues, we allow students to follow the standards of their field because that can be very different, like a mathematics paper from like, I don't know, like a cancer biology paper. So feel free to follow in terms of like voice and that kind of thing and structure, whatever is common in your field.
Some other questions I have that are related to format as well. In the research report, someone's asking, would the quality of a paper be deemed bad if it is short, say less than 10 pages? Answer to that again is no. It's the quality of the research that matters more than the quantity. So again, it's a good rule of thumb is abiding by the rules of your discipline. Some disciplines are going to have shorter papers than others, and that's totally fine. And another question here also kind of about formatting. The rules say that research can't have any links to the outside materials besides in the bibliography. How would I go about embedding a video to demonstrate part of my research? The question to this, unfortunately, is that you can't. We are a paper competition. And so unfortunately, no outside links, as this person says, and that also means no videos.
Yeah. Few other paper related questions. These are more about, I guess, content of the paper. Student wants to know, well, I guess it's actually about formatting. A student is about to publish their research. Congratulations, that's awesome. What a huge accomplishment. So a lot of students will ask us if they're, what to do about like the format of their published paper, if they wanted to submit that to us, if it doesn't quite gel with our requirements. We are quite strict with our requirements. So what the student is asking is, my research paper is going through a peer review process. I figure I want to submit this paper to STS. I've changed the spacing, but now it's 6 pages over the limit. I was wondering if it would be acceptable to cut parts out of the paper, not the one that's being published, but the version for STS. And yeah, for us, that's totally fine. I'm sure you can find a way to make that work with all the other opportunities to talk about your project in our application in task 4. So yes, good luck. We are quite strict with that. Sometimes this sparks another question for people. Can I submit published research to Science Talent Search? And the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. Students do it all the time. On the flip side, do I have to submit published research to STS? Absolutely not. Students do it all the time. Both are equally successful. Students are at all stages of this. Some don't ever have intention to publish. That's okay. And so, yeah, so there's no requirement for us there. Another question about students who collaborated with adults and how do you show your contribution to the project. We ask some very specific questions about this in task 4 of the application. So if you worked on a team, not with another high school student, because that is not permitted for Science Talent Search, you must submit what we call individual research, which means no other high school students can work on that research with you, both who have graduated high school or, they were in high school with you and then they graduated, or who are younger than you. You can submit research that you worked on with like a team of in a lab, like of professionals. And so if you want to identify your contribution to that work, you can identify that for us within the application about what you did. And your mentor will be asked to verify that as well in their recommendation. Let's see. Okay, and then I think the kind of the last question that we'll answer on this topic, how extensively are you looking at the quality of the paper? And that's a fair question. As we mentioned before, Science Talent Search is not just about the research. So while sometimes a student has the best research that we've ever seen, there's a chance that they might not make it as a Science Talent Search finalist. We're just looking for other criteria. And sometimes a student's very first project earns them a spot as a Science Talent Search finalist. So we see it all because we're looking for other factors. And so it tells us also a little bit about why context is important as you work on your application. The more you can tell us about yourself and the situation of your research, the better. And so, yeah, I hope that answers that question. Elaine, you want to take the next one? We're going to move now into talking about evaluation. We received a lot of questions about, well, what are you looking for? And how can my application kind of stand out? So Elaine, I'll let you take the first one.
Yeah. So the first one I have is, does the date and time of submission matter? Do students who submit their projects earlier have theirs read first, or are they all pulled at the same time? So yes and no to does the date and time matter? You have to get it in by the deadline. That does matter a lot. And again, this year the deadline is November 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So as long as you're in by then, you're perfect. We do recommend that you go ahead and submit early. You're actually able to make changes to your application up until that deadline. But the earlier you submit, the more you avoid the probability that you'll forget or that you might have internet issues. So definitely submit early. However, all the papers are reviewed at the same time. And to kind of answer, I think another question I have here is asking more about what that application review process looks like. Essentially, like I said, all are reviewed at the same time. What that means is that every paper is read by 3 PhD evaluators. It also undergoes a rules review and a plagiarism screening. And those that proceed from that round are then reviewed by the top 15 judges who go ahead and pick our top 300 scholars and our top 40 finalists. So after you've submitted your application and we've hit the deadline, that's kind of what that process looks like.
Great, thanks, Elaine.
Yeah.
Next question to answer is, how much weight does everything besides the research report hold in evaluating our submissions? We've talked about this a bit throughout this webinar, but it kind of all matters the same to us. That's why we ask so many questions. We're sorry about that, but it's because we want to learn a lot about you. I mentioned that context is important. We want to know everything about the circumstances in which you're conducting your research. What are the resources that have been available to you? Do you come from a high school that has a lot of science equipment, right? And a laboratory and a class dedicated to research. That is amazing. And you're so lucky. And what are you doing with that, right? And what if you come from a place where you don't have a research program at your high school, and there's like one science teacher for however many students, and you had to do your project in your garage. So both of those circumstances are awesome and produce great projects, and we just want to be able to balance what you had available versus what you accomplished. So the more you can tell us about that, that's awesome. And I guess I would answer this next question in a similar way. Can you give examples of 2 applications that stood out and why? The first thing I'd tell you about that is head on over to our 2021 finalist book. You can Google 2021 Regeneron Science Talent Search finalists, and you can read all about the students who made it to the top 40 last year. So many amazing young people, just like I'm sure all of you who are watching tonight, who really are future leaders in science. You read their bios and you really get that sense, because they definitely have that academic proclivity towards the STEM fields, but they also are doing good things in their community, STEM related or not, and are showing leadership in a lot of different ways. So I also would point to, I'm sure many of you have seen on the news last year, Deja Taylor was a finalist in 2021, wonderful young person who did her research in Iowa, a young Black woman in Iowa who did a project for, I think it was her first research project, became a finalist with great success. Really, really proud to see that. So just wanted to point that out, that it can be your first project and you can become quite successful in this process. Let's see. And then what's the most common mistake you see in applications? That is a great question. We see all kinds of things in our application process that we wish we didn't see, because we know how hard students work on these applications, and there's a lot at stake. The biggest mistake I see is when lies are told, right? Unfortunately, if you are caught in a lie, we will disqualify your application, and that can mean trying to disguise team research as individual research. That's something we check for. We see plagiarism. We do run plagiarism checks, so those are the sad things that we hate to see. But in terms of like mistakes that are honest mistakes, we see some of that too. Making sure your paperwork is signed if you're required to have paperwork, making sure that you answer all the questions. We've had students submit applications where they just type 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 in like the last 2 essays, and they meant to get back to it and they couldn't quite get back to it. So what I would recommend to prevent that heartbreak from happening to you, because if you miss an important essay question, like, and then I don't mean just the essays in the essay section, but in task 4, where you're like telling us about your project, if you forget to tell us, like, I don't know, like where'd the idea come from, or something like that significant, it's not gonna, we don't have as much to go off of, right, when we're making decisions. So what I recommend there is submit your application early. We have a technical support deadline on November 9th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. The reason that's there is we want to be able to help students who might face any issues and make sure you get your application in on time the next day. So we guarantee that we'll answer your question if it's submitted before the technical support deadline. We cannot always guarantee resolution for anything submitted after that. So submit before then. You can keep working on it until the deadline. Everything will automatically save. And download your full entry. You're able to click download and go through it page by page and make sure that everything is there. That's a good thing to maybe ask your parent or friend to help you avoid that heartbreak. We would suggest that. Let's see. And then I think we have a few other new questions. Anything I've missed before we get into those, Elaine?
I don't think so. Again, just a reminder that if your question hasn't been answered, or if we don't get to it just now, we have that help email. I'll go ahead and drop it in the chat just in case you need to reach out to us at any time.
Awesome. Great. So I'll answer the first one, and Elaine, I'll let you get the next one that I see here. If the question is, if we tested ourselves in an experiment, like as a human subject. On the application, do we say we tested subjects, even though it was only one, or no? Yeah, that's actually a good question. You stumped me because I don't remember where we went on this on the wizard. Technically, you could say no because we don't consider that human subject research. So for context, if like you developed a new pen and you wanted to like test it out and on testers, but you're the only tester, the only human who tested it, that's the only time you don't, or one of the only times you don't need to submit IRB pre-approval. And so technically you could say no, but I think if you check yes, it asks if you tested on yourself. I might be wrong about that. And if it doesn't, then go back and click no because you're okay.
And so that next question we have is, do we need to have a mentor of some sort? Can the mentor be the same person as the teacher writing the teacher recommendation? No, you don't need to have a mentor for your research, but we do require that you submit that project recommendation, that you have someone submit that project recommendation. And so really what that's asking for is someone who can attest to your research and attest to the safety with which you did it and that it abides by the guidelines. So sometimes that's going to be a parent. Sometimes that is going to be your science teacher. And yes, the good news to that is the same person can write the same recommendation. Again, it's really a question of who in your life best satisfies the requirements and can give us the answers we need to correctly evaluate both your project and your application as a whole.
Yeah, and on the subject of mentors, we're seeing in the pandemic such an increase in like virtual mentoring. And so sometimes that means something even different than it did in the past, where you have a mentor who advised you for like a day instead of someone who oversaw your project with you from start to finish, just like a different level of involvement. And so it'd be great for you to tell us about those types of mentors too, that they definitely count, and it's good to have their support. The next question here for the educator recommendation, the online form asked questions related to the project, but an athletic coach wouldn't quite understand the technical part of the project. Is a second science teacher a better choice? Yeah, I think this is something on a case-by-case basis that an entrant will have to assess. The reason that we allow someone who's not another science teacher to write that second recommendation is just to help students pick someone who will, help them shine and talk about the best parts about them. So some of the questions are about the project, but not all of them. And they can still help verify some things like, how long did the student work on this project? Like from what you know about it, which may not be a lot, did they do this independently? So they can still assess things like that. So I'll answer this question by saying like, sure, in this case, like if you have another teacher who knows a lot about the project, go for it, and they can do both. But if you don't have that and you're like, I just think that my coach is gonna like tell this important story about something that happened in my life, then that would be a good thing to share. So don't feel bad if you're in that position. That's also important information for us to know.
It looks like our next question is, can I submit a paper like my extended essay that I am doing for a different program? In this case, the IB program. I might call out Allie for help on this one just because I'm not very familiar with the IB program. What I would say is that your paper, again, just really needs to be an analysis of the research that you've done. You've got to have data and you've got to be able to tell us about it. And that's really what that paper should be.
Yeah, no, Elaine, you've got it right. If your IB extended essay is about original research, sure, absolutely. But if it's not, if it's more of like a summary or doesn't sound like it's a proposal, then that wouldn't really qualify for what we're doing here. This is an original research competition, so you do need to have data and results to share. Cool. Next question. I was wondering if studies are compared to other studies in the same category. Are some categories with few applicants given an advantage due to the number of participants in the field? Yeah, this is a great question because it's another difference between the way a lot of science competitions work and the Science Talent Search. We don't have quotas like at ISEF. If you're familiar with our sister competition, the International Science and Engineering Fair, where kind of at the ISEF, if you're an ISEF finalist and you're competing in your category, you know that the number, or maybe you don't know this, but now you know, I mean, I think it's public knowledge, the number of awards awarded in each category are based on percentages, right? So the same percentage of students in each category are awarded. So for Science Talent Search, we don't have any types of quotas. So if some year a certain category is overrepresented in our finalist group compared to the number of entries we received in that category, we're cool with that. It happens sometimes. Usually it's pretty much in alignment, but we don't stick to any quotas for that. They are evaluated by scientists within that category. So as you choose your category, you should think about what types of scientists would best review this project. But then we do some score normalizing, and we have a whole second round of processes that's more, everybody reads all the papers when they're selecting the finalists, and so it becomes a different ballgame at that point. I'm confused about something you said earlier about the rules. Can a student do a project individual that other students helped collect some of the data used in the project? This is a tough question. If you want to email me the specifics, usually we'll address on a case-by-case basis. Email our sts@societyforscience.org help account. If it was like citizen science and they're contributing to a public database that other students can use, maybe sometimes we would deem that fine. If it's not that, then we would need to have a little bit more information. Does our project need to be a breakthrough to be successful, or can it be an improvement upon state-of-the-art research? No, yeah, you don't have to have like a massive breakthrough. You just need to have results to analyze and tell us, what you learned from them. We know that a lot of students are doing research that is kind of breakthrough, which is awesome. And some students were assigned a question and they've just gone about it in a really smart way. So we know that we see kind of everything run across the spectrum when it comes to the type of research. If a mentor's involvement was in helping with learning technical domain knowledge and not the specific application of that knowledge, that research, how can we convey that level of involvement? Yeah, you can tell us that in task 4. There's a question about like, how did you meet your mentor? And like, think like what was your involvement? The mentors are asked the similar set of questions about like how much they contributed versus you contributed. I see mentors write stuff like this all the time. So they seem to find places to let us know this. And it's helpful too, because then that does give us context again of what you contributed and how much freedom you were given, which is cool. Oh yeah, we can take the last one.
I'm sorry. Approximately by what date do you tell us our scholar or finalist status? And I can actually give you specifics on this one, right down to the time. So we announced the top 300 scholars on January 6, 2022 at noon Eastern time. And then the top 40 are announced a couple weeks later on January 20th, also at noon Eastern time.
Awesome.
And I think that is all of our questions. Again, if for any reason we didn't get to your question or you still have questions after this, please do reach out to us at sts@societyforscience.org. Our team promises to get back to you within 24 hours. And we are happy to help you with anything from application issues, troubleshooting, you name it.
Great. Thank you all for joining tonight. We'll see you at the next one. We have one more webinar on November 1st at 8 p.m. featuring finalists from the class of 2021 who will tell you all about why you should follow through and complete that STS application and what you might have to look forward to in their shoes. So look forward to that. All right. Good night, everyone.
See you all then.